Hi everyone, welcome back to the Ranger Shop. So this is part one of my supercharger install. In this episode we're going to cover rebuilding the supercharger, installing the fuel pump, and then getting a few little things ready like our spark plugs, things like that for the install. So stay tuned for part two, coming soon. Now it would be the same process whether you got a Mustang, maybe a few little tweaks, but a Mustang, an Explorer, anything with a 4-liter SOHC. So first off, what we're doing in this part of the video is we're going to go over the supercharger, kind of what it is, what we need to rebuild in it before we just stick it on the truck. Also our fuel pump, that needs to be upgraded to a higher volume fuel pump, and that's going to be in this video. And then a few little tiny things like the spark plugs, we want to go with a smaller gap, but we'll get into that. So first off, let's focus in on the supercharger. So as you can see on the bench here, so this is a 92 supercharger, or a Super Coupe it came out of. It's in pretty good shape. It was a low mileage one, but still there's a few things that we need to do. So on the bench you can see we've got a rebuild kit. We've got some bearings, some needle bearings, the coupler, and also some oil that's going to go in there. And also from the kit itself, the pulley and the hub for the pulley. But let me bring you in here and I'll show you a little more in depth about what we're going to be doing in this video. Here, you can see here we've got our supercharger. So this top plate, like this is the way that it sits in the car, but in our installation it's going to be actually upside down. So before we put this supercharger on though, we're going to have to pull off the pulley, take apart this snout here, and replace, there's a bearing and a seal at the front, and then a bearing at the back. Also you can see on the back of these, here's the needle bearings. So these needle bearings also we're going to replace. After we get these done, we're going to reassemble it and then just clean it and paint it. Okay, so we've got our pulley off, got all our bolts undone. Now we're just going to tap this under here to separate these two halves here. It's just got a gasket maker in between here. So here's our rotors, and then it's got the housing. In here, if you were to see a lot of big scrapes and scratches and stuff, you'd know that it probably wasn't any good. It probably had dirt that went through it, but this one looks pretty good. There's a few little tiny ones, but nothing major at all. The vanes themselves look good. This is the part here that we're going to be rebuilding. So you can see here's the connector. So this little thing just comes off, that gets replaced. And then in behind here is a bearing. Right in here, a bearing sits. And also right up here, there's another bearing. So what we're going to do is we're going to press this shaft out through here and then press on those new bearings. In the housing itself, it's just got a couple little needle bearings. You can see them down in there maybe. These down in here. So these need to be pressed out, and we've got new needle bearings to go in there. So that's just press them out through the back, pop in the new ones. To press out these needle bearings, what we're going to do is we're just going to get a socket that's very close to the right size, just a little bit smaller. And then we're going to put an extension on it, and we're just going to push that down and push them right on through. Okay, there you go. So you can see we've got the housing all cleaned out. The needle bearings down there. We've got the new needle bearings right here. So that's going to go down in there. Before I push them in, I'm going to put a little thin layer of RTB silicone in here, just down in the tube a little bit. And then as that bearing's getting pushed through, it'll seal right around that. And so there'll be nothing leaking out. Okay, let's press it on. To press it on, I'm going to use a 16mm socket, but we're going to do it a little different. And normally you'd put the socket on like this, but since we want the bigger portion of this to be pushing on the bearing, you put it on reverse. So you just take your extension, put it on reverse. That gives you a nice flat surface to push on. So that's how we're going to push those bearings in, just like that. Okay, so here's our rotors. So I've just cleaned them up, very lightly polished them, cleaned up the mating surfaces for the gasket. And then on the end here, I don't know if you can see that, it's kind of dark. Let's see if I can get that up. There. So in the end there, you can see where that seal rides, where the needle bearing runs. This groove here, you got to make sure there's not damaged. If it's scored, then you're going to have to probably get a new supercharger. But this doesn't look very bad. Looks like it's very low mileage, just like the seller mentioned. So now we're going to slide this back together. Okay, so the rotor's ready to go, the housing's ready to go. It's got our new needle bearings in there. Let's get started on the nose piece here. So basically, again, there's a bearing right about here. There's a seal, bearing, and then we've got our connector here, our coupling. So we'll just toss that coupling out. See our two bearings, our coupling, and our seal, and then an E-ring for the front here. So let's press this out. We're just going to press this through first off, and then once we have this out, we'll replace the bearings. So we put the old nut back on here, so we're pressing on that rather than on the threads on here. And then it's got some space in here so it can drop down. I'm just going to press it right on the plate, right like that. So we're going to just push it through. Okay, so now we need to get this bearing off of this end. And this is a solid shaft here. You can see the ridges. It can't come off this way. It's got to go off that way. So we're going to use that guillotine press down there. And I'm going to drop it in like that. And then just get a punch and push this through against that. I'm hoping that should go right through. So we've got the shaft. There's a spring in between. The coupling at the end. Just something to note with this coupling. You can see in there that it is knurled, like it's got threads that it fits on here, and on the shaft you can see it there, right there. So bearing goes on first, then that, but it's really sticky because of that. And also then with putting it on, I would think you got to really try to hit the right spot to get that thing on there just right. So it's going to be fun going back on. Then we've got our bearings, small bearing at the back where the coupling is, and then the bigger bearing on the snout, on the nose, and then our seal. So let's get the bearings on along with this coupler. I'm going to push the bearing on separate first so that there's no extra pressure on the coupler, and then I'm going to push the coupler on top of the bearings. First of all, we're going to lightly oil them with the supercharger oil there in the background. Really lightly oil them, and then when we press them on, we press only on the inner race. We do not touch the outer race to push them on, otherwise we'll dent the balls. Okay, we got a coupling on there now, and there's no gap, so that's good. This end's done now. Now we got to get the bearing in the snout. Okay, so we got the bearing in the nose there. Got the shaft ready to go, spring back in here. This spring just puts pressure to keep the
the shaft pushing into the coupler. I just wrapped this top part because what we're going to do is we're going to assemble this in there, get it all nice and tight, and then we're going to slide the seal in the nose, the snout. So this is just to stop it from cutting the seal on any of these sharp edges of these metal. So what we're going to do is slide the seal over top, and then what I did is I wound this around starting down here and going up. So I'll just take it off and the seal will be left in there with no damage. I'm going to put a little bit of oil on that seal. Okay, I think this is probably the hardest part of the whole job. So we're trying to get this seal on here without rolling the edge or without scoring it. So you can see I've got tape right up to just covering the lip, and then I've taped it all the way up. I've got my seal all lubed up with the Supercharger oil. Goes in like that. And so I'm going to just put it in, and then I'm going to just wiggle it around a little bit, make sure that it's clearing everything, and then tap it down with, I think it's probably about a 30 mil socket. We'll tap it into place. Okay, there we go. So we got our snap ring in here. We've got this seal pushed right tight. So the seal was actually a little bit further down here. So what I did is I just pushed this in here until the seal was out touched. Okay, so now for the coupler that goes in here, you can see the coupler, it's got kind of these little guides. These are the holes where the pins go through, but see how there's raised? Well, that helps the pin guide its way in into the couplet. So what we need to do is put the raised portion down. So that's the way it would go in, just like that. So that raised portion goes down, and then what will happen is the compressor will go in here. It'll help it line up itself a little better. We're also going to put a little bit of oil on this also. We've got 3 parts for our supercharger here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a thin layer of this gasket maker on each one, and then slide it in. So we're going to do the blower first. So our supercharger is all together now. I just put the pulley on temporary just to spin it. It spins nice and freely. Our gasket maker, I've let it set up for overnight, so this will be nice and sealed up between here. Now I'm going to add the oil, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tape off all the ports, and we're going to paint it. So to add the oil, you need it perfectly level, and you'll actually see, you can see where the line is. There's a line in there to what level it's got to be up to, and it's basically right into where it's coming out of the port, the fill port. So we've got our supercharger all rebuilt, ready to go, painted. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put on the pulley for the Moddbox kit. It's a taper fit here, and this needs to be actually heated up. So this is the hub. So this hub goes on, and then you can interchange your different pulleys, whatever size pulleys you want to run, just by sliding them onto this hub. It's very well machined. It's very tight. It's a slip fit. It's very, very, very tight. Anyways, so what we're going to do is we're going to heat this up, slide it on there. We're going to use the nut to do that. We've got the nut, and we can put a wrench on here. So we'll get a wrench on there, and then the nut, and we'll just tighten it all the way in till this back of the hub is hitting that ridge. It will stop itself. So that's going to go all the way on there, locked on with that nut. Then we grab the pulley. We just warm it up a bit. Normally you wouldn't have to warm it up, but because this is going to be hot, it's expanded. That's going to have to be expanded so that it slips over. Okay, let's get that done. Okay, the hub's on there. Things on nice and tight, torqued up. And now we've got the pulley to go on. We use the 6 bolts, 6 little Allen key bolts. We're going to use a little bit of Loctite on those, and then we're going to just torque them in there. So we don't want to use much torque at all here. It's aluminum, cross pattern. Okay, so our supercharger's done. We're gonna put this on the bench. Okay, let's get this fuel pump in here. So what I did is I dropped the exhaust right here, just so I can get up in there. On the other side is the filler neck, and it's just too tight to try and get it in through that side. But this way, I think I can get this pump out. Now I've got a body lift on here, a 3-inch body lift. That's why I think I'll be able to get up and out, clear it up out of here, and then come down. If you don't have a body lift, sometimes a real quick way to do this is loosen the back bed bolts quite a bit, and then remove the front bed bolts, and then just jack the front of your bed up. But really make sure you don't hit your cab. So if we take a look up here, see, there's the fuel pump, there's the ring. So what I'm going to do is just undo those fittings, take off the electric. First though, I want to blow off all the dust. So we're going to blow out this whole area, clear out all the dirt and debris and stuff so that it doesn't drop into the tank. Here's the fuel pump right here on top of the tank. And here's the ring. This is the ring you got to knock off. So normally what I'll do is I'll just take a hammer with a soft punch and just undo it just by hitting this here, and you can just turn that thing right off. You can see there's one clip here, that's for your fuel tank filler vent, so that just pops out there. And then here you can see these clips here, this is for the fuel supply and return. You just push these in, wiggle it around and pop it out, but get some air under here and blow out all the dirt and everything first, and then also shoot some brake clean up in there first before you, because sometimes what happens is this fills up with mud and it all goes up into here, and it's very difficult to undo. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pop off these lines now, get them out of here. I've got a garbage bag that I'm just going to place over here once I get my pump out of here, and then let's get this pump on the bench. Okay, so we got the fuel pump out here now on the bench. So you can see it's got a lot of junk here that it's sucked up. So this sock is going to get replaced, this little filter. We got a new filter here that's going to go with the new pump. And basically, like the wires are here on the old fuel pump, you can see them here. But since the connector is different, we're going to replace those wires. So we're going to use some good quality butt connectors, and we're going to use the ones that are liquid tight. So here's the butt connectors we're going to use. Inside here is, when you heat it up, it'll sealant that comes out, and it seals this whole thing solid so that no liquid can get inside. A good way to tell if you've got a good quality butt connector is if there's a seam. So take a look inside it before you go and crimp it, and if you see a line and a seam, like where it's rolled and then a seam, those are the cheap ones, and that seam often will get jammed up and it won't give you a very good butt connection. So solid tube just like that, nice quality butt connector, especially in the tank. You don't want to be doing this or have it come apart when you're out in the bush. So a couple butt connectors, that's that. For clamps here, because you're going to be taking off this fuel line right here, the fuel line, we're taking that off here. And what we're going to use is not a normal hose clamp on there. We want to use a fuel injection hose clamp. So that's these type of hose clamps, you know, where it's got a band, solid band all the way around. So when you tighten up here, rather than leaving a gap here and here, it gives a complete seal all the way around it. So these are the type of hose connectors. Anywhere, anytime that you do anything on fuel pressure, with full fuel pressure, use fuel injection hose clamps. So you can buy these kits off of Amazon, wherever. I could put a link in the description where to get those. So first step, we just take off this screw and this screw over here, and this is our ground screw too, so you got to remember that's got to go back on there. But that screw, and then this bottom piece here will come right off, and then inside here is where the fuel pump is. So let's take that off, and then also this clamp here, I'm going to pop that clamp off. Okay, we've got everything taken apart now. So we've got our high flow pump. We took the rubber insulator that was on the bottom of the factory pump. It kind of went up the side here and on the bottom. And we just cut the bottom out of it because this pump here is longer. If you look at the length of it, can you see the difference in the length there? So this length here, this pump will not fit in this housing unless you take this rubber piece. It's about that thick. Well, here you go. Here's how thick it is. So pretty thick chunk of rubber on the bottom there. And then also there's some little feet on the bottom of the pump, and I just ground those off too because it was holding, this cover would not line up with the factory holes. It wouldn't quite go on far enough. So now what I've done is I've ground these off, and then you can see there's this little hole here in the bottom of the pump that I have opened up the factory housing here. You can see I just opened this up a little bit so that it's got good flow through there. Normally it'd be stood off with the feet, but since we're right tight, that's what'll work for me. So now I've slid it into the housing. I've tried this. It all fits in there just perfect right now. Super tight, but that's good. It's better to be tight than loose and rattling around. Now the one thing is the fuel filter, like not the fuel strainer that came with the pump. This one here, you can see how low profile that is. It is too thin to lock onto here and to still extend. You can see that it's much too thin. It doesn't have anything further sticking out of here compared to right here, and this will hit this edge of the plastic here. So the filter, it looks like it's different than the one that's in the kit. Like when you look at the pictures in the kit, it's a different filter than this, and it looked like it's got a little bit more of a nose. So this filter will not work with this mod. I've tried it. I tried all sorts of different positions, moving it around. It's not going to work. So what I did is I ordered this. It's just a $10. It's the factory filter, just like the factory one that we pulled out here. And you can see it's much bigger for square footage here, much bigger filter. And also it fits in between the feet. So you can see the feet here. Well, that fits in between there. So it just locks in really well. So it provides a little bit of cushion on the bottom there too. So that's what I did. I'm just going to put in the factory filter, brand new one. And then with the high flow pump, that should be perfect. So let's assemble this now. We'll get this bottom unit all assembled, and then we'll do the wiring. Okay, so you can see now this whole assembly's been put together. The pump's in here, and you can tell that pump has got no movement up and down, which is good. You want it locked in there. You don't want it rattling around. You can see in the bottom, it's nice and tight here. This hole's got a nice opening. This is all lined up. And the way that lines up, it fits perfectly with this factory pump, which lines up those feet. So see how it lines up just right. So that's it. I'm gonna just hold that and put it on after I get my wiring, because right now I can use this to just set it here on the bench. And what I'm going to do is replace the wiring. So the wiring that came with it is a much thinner gauge. You can see it's a real thin gauge, whereas the wiring for the factory pump, it's a real nice thick gauge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these as short as possible, maybe right about here, and then cut these ones as long as possible to use the better gauge wire. And then we're going to cut, crimp, and then heat shrink these butt connectors onto this new wiring. So you can tell on here, on the pump. So if you look on the pump, you'll see the factory Ford pump. There's a positive and a negative. So you line that up with your wires. You can tell which ones which ones are positive, negative. So if I look on this, so positive is the black stripe one. So it's like a tan with a black stripe. That's my positive wire. The solid black is my negative. So that's how I'm going to connect it. And here I've got red, obviously, positive, and then negative. So let's hook these things up. Okay, there we go. So we've got the wires crimped on there, and I recommend a good pair of crimpers. Not using just the cheaper, like the mechanical ones, just because what you'll do is sometimes, especially with these shrink ones where it's got the liquid seal inside, you'll puncture it here if you use the other type, whereas these ones just put enough pressure to squeeze the ring but not to puncture the heat shrink. So now you just give it a little bit of a tug, make sure everything's good. Don't want this stuff to come apart in the truck. So now I'm going to just heat shrink this. You can see the gasket material kind of comes out, the little sealer comes out. So that's ready to go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this, the pressure hose here, and I'm going to use one of these hose clamps in here. Let's see which side fits. 10 to 12 millimeters. So I'll try this and see. If not, we'll go one size smaller. Okay, there we go. So that's the clamps on here. To get this tube on was quite tough. It didn't really want to flex because, I mean, this is all older and brittle tube. So I just heated it up a little bit with my heat gun. But again, do it at your own risk. This is gas that's in here. Any spark, and that gets pretty hot, that heat gun, you could catch fire. So this is on here now. Got the clamp on there real nice and tight. My wires wrap around just like factory, and we'll be able to plug this into here. There we go. So that's good, and it's all nice and contained. It's not like there's wires everywhere hanging all over the place. I might throw a little tie strap just right here just to hold that together, but I don't even think it's necessary. This is good to go. So to put this in now, I'm going to put the strainer on the bottom, and then each one of these tubes I'm just going to coat with a little thin layer of grease, and that's going to help those O-rings to slide on as when I install it in the truck. So again, we're just going to make sure that we nice and clean the fuel tank on top of the fuel tank, nice and clean before we slide it in, and then slide this thing in there. And then it's got the springs. It just sets itself on the bottom of the tank, right where it needs to be. So we got the fuel pump all done. We're just putting it back in. So this gas, so I'm just going to pull that out, clean it up a little bit, make sure the groove inside's clean. And then I'm just going to take my fuel pump and I just put it in at an angle, slide it in there, and then crank her down. Okay, so here's the ring that goes on top of the fuel pump. Just put a little bit of grease in it because it's plastic to plastic, so it helps it slide on. You get a better seal. Here's our pump in there. See, it just gets pushed down. There's a little tab here that lines it up. So let's get this in now. Okay, the next step to the supercharger install, we're going to install some new spark plugs. These ones are SP440s. They're the recommended ones for the SOHC engine. The normal gap for Rangers, well, this year Rangers anyway, is 62 to 68 thou. But we're going to bring this down a little bit. We just set it to 54. So it's tightening up the gap a little bit because you are using a supercharger. But again, I'm running such a low boost, it shouldn't really affect the spark much. If you were to go higher, you want to close it down. I believe in the manual, the instructions for the Moddbox kit, they say about 34 thou. To install the spark plugs, we're going to use some high temp, right here, some high temp anti-seize. And we're going to put it on here, but we're not going right to the end. We're just going to put it, you got to make sure that if you create a short, like from here, and you maybe get a little bit on the electrode here, it will short across here rather than firing across here, the gap. So you just put on the threads a little bit of this high temp anti-seize all the way down, and that'll make it so that you can always back these out later on. On the boot side, we're going to put some dielectric grease, so in each boot, in each spark plug boot. So we've got our supercharger ready to go. We've got the fuel pump done, and we've done a few other mods, different videos you can check out. But now we're going to get going on the superchargers. So stay tuned for part 2 coming soon.